Arrow maze is played on a rectangular grid with some numbers. Your goal is to find a path that goes through the entire grid, visiting each cell only once. The path starts from the cell with number 1, proceeds to 2, and so on, incorporating the numbers already found in the grid. The path can jump from one cell to another over several other cells, but if a cell with a certain number has an arrow in it, the next number must be located in the direction of the arrow. If the cell has no arrow, the subsequent number can be located in any direction, and at any distance. So how do we approach this? Well, first we need to identify the gaps. For example, here is a 4 with a diagonal arrow. We know it must point to a 5 located in this direction. We have 2 possible cells that can contain this 5. However, the next number in the chain must be a 6, and we know our 6 is here. And out of the 2 arrows we have in the 2 possible cells, only one points towards the 6, meaning that's where our 5 is. This strategy can also work the other way. For example, this 15 here also has 2 possible cells where a 16 can be located. However, this cell here has an arrow down, pointing at 34 and 20, while we know we need a 17. Therefore, the 16 is not in this cell, meaning it must be in the other one. Sometimes there is some low-hanging fruit around. This 22 here only has a single cell it's pointing to that is still empty, meaning this cell must contain a 23. This cell, in turn, is also pointing to a single empty cell, so that's where 24 must be. And this 24 is also pointing to a single empty cell, which must contain a 25. This 27 is pointing to 2 empty cells. However, 29 is already on the board, and one of these 2 cells has an arrow that is not pointing towards the 29. This means 28 is in the other empty cell. Sometimes things can get a little more complicated. For example, we have this 25 here that has no arrow, so theoretically there's nothing we can tell about the location of 26. However, there's only so many cells that are still empty and in straight line from the 25. And we can limit the number even more if we go for empty cells that are in a straight line from both 25 and 27. To be precise, there are 3 cells like this that are still empty, and 2 of them happen to have arrows that are not pointing towards the 27. This means our 26 needs to be in the last of these 3 cells. This 6 here has only 3 cells it's pointing to that are in straight line from our 8, and only one of these 3 cells doesn't have an arrow pointing away from the 8. This cell must contain a 7. This arrow here is pointing at 14 and 16, but we already have 15 on the board, meaning this cell must contain a 13. This arrow here is now pointing at 13, 14 and 16, but with 13 and 15 already on the board, it must contain a 12. And at this point we are somewhat stuck, so time for slightly more advanced techniques. Let's look at cells A and B here. A is clearly pointing either at B or at 7, but 6 is already on the board, meaning it must be B. This means that if A is X, then B is X plus 1. What's more, this cell here is clearly pointing at our X, meaning it must be X minus 1. Similarly, if we take these 2 cells, A is clearly pointing at B, so if A is Y, then B is Y plus 1. What does it give us? Well, on its own not much, but let's come up with another little grid, containing numbers from 1 to 36. And now let's mark the values that we already have on our arrow maze grid. Now it becomes clear that our x minus 1, x plus 1 chain must either be 9, 10 and 11, or it must be 3 of the values between 30 and 33. However, we already have 12 on the board and x plus 1 is not pointing towards it, meaning these 3 values can't be 9, 10 and 11. What's more, the other gap in our numbers on board has 4 values, 30, 31, 32 and 33. And since the arrow in the x plus 1 cell is not pointing towards 34, it can't be 33. This means it can only be 32, x is 31 and x minus 1 is 30. Neither of the cells 32 is pointing to has an arrow, but only one of them is in a straight line to 34, so it must be the one containing 33. At this point there's only one cell left that is in a straight line from 36 and doesn't have an arrow pointing elsewhere, meaning this cell contains a 35. This cell here has an arrow pointing at 33 and 4, but with 32 already on the board it must contain a 3. And since there's only one cell that is in a straight line from it and doesn't have an arrow pointing in different direction, This cell must contain a 2. Now let's go back to our y and y+1 cells. There are only 5 values left to place, so we're quite limited in options. 20 is already on the board and the arrow in the y+1 cell is not pointing towards it, so these two cells can't be 18 and 19. They can't be 10 and 11 either, because 12 is on the board already as well, and the arrow in y+1 is not pointing towards it either. This means y must be 9 while y+1 is 10. This makes this cell here an 11 and we are left with 2 empty cells and 2 values to place. It's fairly clear the upper one of the two must contain a 18, while the lower one contains a 19. And that's it, all the numbers are on the board and all the cells are filled. Hope you'll stay with us for more math and logic puzzle solutions.